All right, we are back with another edition of Seminole Sidelines, our FSU football spring practice preview. And today we're going to talk about, I think, one of the position groups that I know all three of us are very excited about seeing, and I think most FSU fans, the defensive tackles and nose tackles. And my name is Pat Burnham. I'm joined by former FSU offensive lineman Mark Salva, who also coached football at South Carolina and Florida State, and Osceola owner and publisher Jerry Kutz. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Looking forward to it. Awesome.
Well, Jerry, you and I probably are anomalies to most football people. We love practice, and I think we both get fired up about spring football practice. So I want to start with a general question to you. We started this iteration of the Osceola in 2019, prior to the 2019 season starting, as a website. How excited are you about this particular spring practice in a general sense compared to the previous three?
Oh, much more.
Or four, I should say.
Yeah. I think the first one, we were curious about the coaches, and now we think, got a pretty good handle on the coaches. And there's a lot of young talent to see how they develop this spring, and some of the older guys that are coming back. I'm curious to see what kind of leadership roles they take with the new guys.
Yeah, and Mark, just your thoughts. You've obviously been with us since 2019. We've done Seminole Sidelines every Sunday during the season. Obviously, you're not down here during the spring except for a practice or two, but just your overall sense of things, your anticipation of this spring practice with all the expectations that go along with this particular football team.
Well, I would think that this spring will mirror closer to what a spring for a good football team would look like. Really competitive, really tight position battles. The talent level between the best guy and the next guy in line is not as great as it has been in the past. And I think that'll be reflective in the types of intensity you'll see in practice, in the drills, and every day is a competition. And that makes for really fun practices for the neutral spectator. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, let's talk a little bit about the defensive tackles. There were some key departures. Darrell Jackson transferred out of the program at the end of the season, and Robert Cooper was lost to graduation and obviously is going to try to move on to the NFL. There were some key additions, particularly two transfers, in Western Michigan's Braden Fiske and Miami's Darrell Jackson. Both are in school now, and both will participate in spring practice in some form. And of course, they added Keith Sampson, the defensive tackle from New Bern, North Carolina, who will enroll this summer. So we won't get into Keith's involvement, but obviously, guys, you have to think with the departures, looking at the departures and then the additions based on the body of work that Fiske and Jackson have had in their careers, both at Western Michigan and Miami, that Florida State at defensive tackle is probably a little bit deeper than they were a year ago. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, 100%. As I look at this group, when you think back to last year's season, when we had that 3-game skid, that drop off, that could be directly correlated to the fact that Fabien Lovett was hurt, Jared Verse got hurt, and the defense really struggled. And that was because the drop off between Lovett and the next guy in line was so great. We really struggled to slow teams down playing the way that we want to play, which is, we want to play with 2 deep safeties. We want to play the run with a 6-in-a-box look, and against an 11 personnel. So the drop off was so great, we really struggled. What excites me about this group is the drop off now. If Lovett gets hurt, now you have a Braden Fiske or Darrell Jackson to step in, and the drop off is not so great. Lovett's a really, really good college player. Is he an elite defensive tackle? Is he, a first-round draft pick? TBD. I mean, he could get there, but I don't think he's there right now. And so the fact that a guy that's that level, we lose him and the drop-off is so great, impacts the whole outcome of the season, essentially. To me, this group now, with this talent that's there, we're not handcuffed to one guy having to be available every week.
Right. I think that's really good. I mean, that was the season last year. in terms of defensively. Big drop off when we lost Verse and Lovett. This year you got depth, and Mark, to your point, there is depth, and I don't mean to be negative on this point. We have 3 and 4 star players that are going to compete and provide depth, and I just want to caution that there's people out there that are there. They have depth with 4 and 5 star players. So as we go through this conversation, I'm super positive and optimistic about this unit. But I've seen some reporting that makes this unit. We're not Georgia yet. Let me put it that way.
Right. I mean, for me, when I look at our team as we do these previews, I'm looking at it in the context of our schedule.
Yes.
And our schedule only. Right?
Yeah.
Can we beat the teams on our schedule? Not are we ready to go in a 14 playoff and play against the likes of Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, that kind of deal. Yeah, obviously we're not there, right?
Yeah, I agree. I'd keep it in that context. How does this group compare to others in the ACC? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Obviously, Florida State still has to prove that it's ready to take that next step, not only to the ACC championship, but also even into competing with the Georgias, Alabamas in the world. And I think what we're doing is comparing it to where FSU was at this position last year and the previous years. And let's take a little bit now. Listen, we're going to show you guys our projected depth chart, both at defensive tackle and nose tackle. And we do know that Mike Norvell puts a premium on guys being versatile. So there will probably be guys that'll line up at both spots in the spring, and this will probably shake it over the course of the next 15 practices in the spring. This will change, and you might see a guy move here or there. But this is our projected depth chart. And since we were talking about Lovett, let's start with the defensive tackles. And obviously we are projecting at least starting this spring, Fabien Lovett to be the starter, Darrell Jackson from Miami, who transferred from Miami behind him, then Malcolm Ray, and Malcolm is a guy that could probably play either position, and then obviously Tifase and Woody behind those guys. So let's just talk a little bit about the nose tackle position. You've already mentioned Lovett. Listen, this is his money year, right? You've mentioned that. I guess one of my questions is, with knowing what you have in Lovett, how many reps you give him in the spring when you are this deep, Mark? You kind of know what you got in him. How much, obviously back in your day, in my day, nobody got spring off really, unless you were a 5th-year senior at Florida State. Then Coach Bowden gave you the get out of jail free card. But they practice differently today than they did in the past. There is some snap management or, in practice. How much do you anticipate Fabien practicing, and how many reps would you try to get him in, particularly contact work?
Yeah. I mean, for me, you got to continue to develop him. I think he does all the individual work, all of the, but in the full contact stuff, the scrimmage stuff, I think get him in, get him out. Let's get Tifase and Woody and Ray. Let's get them a lot of reps. Develop those guys, bring them along. See what you have in Darrell Jackson, and make sure everything you think he is. But with Lovett, I think, an older guy who knows the system, so he's not trying to learn scheme. He's trying to develop skills, and a lot of individual work, a lot of some full contact, 3-on-3, 2-on-2 stuff, and get him in and get him out. Keep him sharp.
Obviously Darrell Jackson started 11 or 12 games at Miami last year. He was one of their better defensive linemen, obviously, as a starter. Do you anticipate either one of you anticipate him pushing Lovett for the starting nose tackle position? Does it matter? We know they're going to rotate at least 4 guys between the 2 positions. Does it matter who's listed as starter? I have a feeling that going into fall camp or the first game, it's probably going to be an or, right? We see a lot of ors on these depth charts. But what does Darrell Jackson bring to, we think it's an upgrade. You lose Cooper, but and that's not a slight to Robert Cooper at all. He was a tremendous player for Florida State, but we think there's an upgrade there. We don't know about Florida State may know about Darrell Jackson's eligibility waiver. We don't. With it being an unknown, Jerry and Mark, how many reps, if you don't know that the kid has been approved to play next year, how many reps do you get him if there's still some uncertainty going into this thing? And the NCAA has obviously come out and said, with the addition of the one-time free transfer, that they're going to be a little bit harder on these multiple transfer kids as far as approving these waivers. So assuming they don't know at this point, how many reps do you give Darrell Jackson in the spring?
Well, I mean, like you said, I don't know the stats. Sometimes these things go all the way right to the end, to the week before the first game.
Yes.
I would think, behind the scenes, they have a sense of what the decision is going to be. And hopefully it's just a formality. I mean, it is a unique hardship situation with his family situation and want to be closer to home to his family. So that may, be a little different than just some guy saying, hey, I don't like it here, or there's a coaching change, I want to get out, So I think it's a unique situation. So I hope they have a good sense, and based on that would probably dictate how you manage his practice time and how much you integrate him into the scheme and the plan. I don't know what you think, Jerry.
I'm kind of a no guts, no glory guy. I mean, I think you brought him here to play, so you're going to, I'd be optimistic and be sure he got, I wouldn't reduce his reps. I mean, I'd be sure he got his fair share.
Well, listen,
you do have to evaluate him in the context of our scheme. And I think, Mark, to your point with Fabien Lovett, you want those two guys to set a pace for the younger guys to know what it looks like. This is the way it needs to be done in a practice setting, in my mind. How do you feel about that?
No, I mean, for sure. That's why I said, they need to be there. They need to be present. They need to be around. They need to be in, but when it starts getting grindy and really, really hot and guys are flying around getting sloppy, maybe you protect them a little bit. You don't want to have something stupid happen,
Right.
But to your point, obviously you want them in every meeting. You want them at every practice. You want them leading the lines during drills. You want them first up in all the drills. I mean, you want them leading and encouraging and doing the things that good football players do that lead teams. So for sure. And to get Jackson in the mix there, I feel like, he's got relationships on the team already. He already did, obviously, being an ex-teammate of Josh Farmer from high school, right? So, you've got that. Plus, I'm sure several guys from North Florida that are on the team he's good friends with. But, it's you want those two guys, leading. And then, we'll talk about the three techniques later. But, that's the thing I kind of like about this. You've got, I mean, really, the really, really young guys you have are not as much as it has been, right? These guys have been in the program 3 and 4 years. So that's exciting. That's where you want your older players, is on the line of scrimmage, both on offense and defense. It sets the tone of practice. Those guys start jawing at each other. One of my favorite statistics in spring is how many fights do you have? Right? I want to know. I expect the Osceola to report on the number of fights during spring practice. That tells me that
I don't know how Mike would feel about that, but I agree. I think. Listen, if you're smart, what I used to do, I used to get out of the way of the first padded practice. I used to get my fight out of the way. I mean, sometimes it went in my favor, sometimes it did not. But
right.
In high school and in college, first day of pads, I went ahead and got into it.
I will say this. Older guys do know that when you get in a fight, it blows you up, and you're done the rest of practice.
Yeah, that's right.
So they may do it for a little bit of show, but they get out of there real quick because there's still 12 periods of practice to go, and you don't want to be all blowed up. Right?
Yeah. Well, listen, Jerry, you and I have been at practice a bunch this past fall, and obviously have been very impressed with some of the younger kids. Tifase is a kid that transferred to Florida State, was not eligible last year, but you and I have both noticed him at practice. Antavius Woody was a really good defensive tackle in high school, but he played offensive tackle too. He spent part of the last season on the offensive line before moving over to the defensive line. Which of those two kids are you most excited to see in spring practice?
Tifase is a very unusual kid. That is a big man. Thick, muscular, but he seems just absolutely green in terms of his football experience. So it's going to be interesting to watch how Odell coaches him up, because he's a ball of clay. I think Odell can do a lot with him. Would you agree, Pat? He's freakishly fast.
Yeah, he caught my eye early in camp and repeatedly did so during the season. He was very good. He plays with very good leverage. He was clearly not intimidated when they went to board drills or whatever they call their one-on-one drills there at Florida State these days, and clearly was not intimidated when they got into one-on-one pass rush drills. And he was a guy that, as far as the young guys at that group, obviously I think we're all excited to see Darrell Jackson and what he can bring to this defense. But as for the young guys, Tifase is a guy that I'm certainly going to have an eye on, particularly when they go to put on the pads and see if he can make a run to get into the defensive line rotation at nose tackle or even defensive tackle, because as we said, that depth chart is going to change. But yeah, certainly I'm as fired up to see him as I am anybody of those interior two positions.
Yeah, Woody, I think, brings a little bit more experience in the game than Tifase, I'm very interested to see Woody. I don't mean to dismiss him, but it's just Tifase. There's thick kids, Mark, and then there's really thick kids.
Yeah.
They look like they almost have a different kind of muscle.
Yeah.
Like a Greg Jones kind of thing. And
okay.
Tifase is he's a very hard.
You want him coming off the bus early.
Yeah. He's pretty.
Well, and to your point, Jerry, we're not discounting Antavius Woody at all, but listen, he made the move during the season, so he's going to be a little bit behind. Has not had as many reps at defensive tackle as Tifase has. And so, and he was mostly scout team during the season, as was Tifase, but he just didn't get as many reps early on in camp. So, naturally, just in the natural course of things, he should be behind these guys to some extent. But if you go back and watch his high school tape, he is a good athlete. He's got tremendous quickness and is a big kid. So listen, we're excited about most of these young kids. We are very excited about, but obviously we all have somebody that we've honed in over the course of the last year when we practice. We all pay attention to different things. So, but yes, I think the nose tackle position going into spring is, like every position, really, you and I, Jerry, and I know Mark too, we all get excited about spring because somebody's going to make a move that we're not expecting one way or the other. So there's always somebody that's going to do, exceed expectation once you get into the bulk of the work. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out, which one of those young kids can factor into maybe being a third guy. And of course, Malcolm Ray is back. Malcolm has played both nose and defensive tackle, and we'll kind of see. He was dependable as a backup this year, actually made 3 starts. I think he ended up with about 12 tackles and about 12 game appearances, somewhere around there. So we don't want to forget about Malcolm either. He has been a contributor and a starter on this team, and it'll be interesting to see how far he comes along in his development. Is he ready to take the next step? And then, of course, now we'll move over to the defensive tackle, they did add Braden Fiske to the roster from Western Michigan. We are listing Braden as 4-team right now because the only time we have seen Braden, he has been in a shoulder harness. So we do not know, or the last time I saw him, he was in a shoulder harness. We don't know the extent of that injury, where he is in his rehab process. With a shoulder and him being a redshirt senior and kind of a proven player, you would think that he would be limited to some extent. But we do anticipate that Braden will be competing and in the rotation, if not the starter, in fall camp. He would definitely be in the 3-man rotation at the very least. But we have going into the spring practice, we have Dennis Briggs as the number 1 defensive tackle. We anticipate that Josh Farmer will play both positions, but with Braden Fiske possibly being limited, we think that he will probably see some reps at tackle. Daniel Lyons, a redshirt freshman, who's a huge kid, very athletic, or Bishop Thomas, another redshirt freshman who we've been very impressed with, another kid that plays with great leverage. We're very excited to see him as well. But let's start with Dennis Briggs. Dennis has kind of jumped around from defensive tackle to either one of the 2 end spots. We even saw him with the injury diverse or limited verse early in the season. We saw Briggs move out to defensive end some early in the season. It looks like he's finally going to settle in at one position, and that's that 3 technique position. Mark, how good when he came back from that COVID year, came back at that North Carolina game, had a great North Carolina game, got hurt a couple weeks later against Louisville, did not see any action. But in those 3 or 4 games he played at defensive tackle, he was very good. How good or how much better can Briggs be when he's got a permanent home and can concentrate on one position?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I was a little disappointed in Briggs last year. I was expecting, and I remember in our preseason preview, I was expecting him to really have a bigger impact than he did. And he was okay, but he didn't, I saw that flash that North Carolina game a couple years ago and thought, man, this guy's got some skills, and, I'm looking forward to see him develop. And it just kind of didn't really happen for him. So I'm hoping he kind of regains that form coming in. And, I look at this group and just really the group as a whole, you have so much versatility. I mean, you might see Lovett at 3 technique and Jackson at nose tackle, right? You might get that rotation, and then you got Briggs, and you got a strong 3-man deal, and then when you throw in Fiske, I mean, you may have packages of like run stopping packages with, multiple guys in there, or pass rushing packages. I mean, you may see, Briggs maybe a defensive end to stop. You have so many different options you have when you have this many bodies for specific packages of things you might want to do defensively. But I think a big part of that is Dennis Briggs, and because he is. But I agree with you. If he can settle in one place and really just concentrate on that, I think it would help him maybe regain his form from a couple years ago.
Yep. Jerry, what are your thoughts on Briggs finally finding it looks like a permanent home, what we anticipate being a permanent home?
I think exactly what Mark thinks. I expected more from him last year than what he was able to deliver for whatever reason. I think he has a higher ceiling, and is that a mirage, or is that real? So we'll see this spring what kind of development he makes. He's going to get pushed. There's good competition.
Yeah.
They're going to be competing for playing time, and it is his final year.
Yep.
So this is go time for him.
Well, and we both expect Farmer to get better. I think all 3 of us expect Farmer, to continue to develop. This will be his 3rd year in the program. We've all been impressed with him at times. He had a big game against NC State. Probably had one of the bigger plays of the year for Florida State when he knocked Devin Leary out of the game and kind of changed the course of that game. So we know he can be an impact player. He's a physical kid. He's another one of those guys, Jerry. You don't mind him being one of the first guys off the bus. He kind of looks different. He's thick, athletic. But I think he, along with Briggs and Fiske, give FSU a formidable 3 guys at defensive tackle. And then, of course, we've seen Daniel Lyons and we've seen Bishop Thomas, and Jerry, I think both of us agree there's something different about Bishop Thomas. He's as a smaller guy, he's 6'2", does not have the length that most guys have interior at Florida State. They've gotten pretty big. Most of these guys are 6'4" and 6'5" anymore, but Bishop's about 6'2", probably around 290, 300 pounds. But when we saw him in the fall, boy, does he play with great leverage.
Yeah. He's a guy that, you can move a lot of places on the defensive front too,
Yep.
Even though he's 6'2", 290, he's pretty agile. So he's an interesting watch. And the thing about Farmer that, it matters to me, that kid's an outstanding student. So, when you think about him, there's a guy that's over a 3.0, and intelligence doesn't hurt.
No, it does not. It helps a lot, actually.
And usually when you're over at 3.0, it also means you're dependable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of puts you ahead of the curve relative to everybody else usually.
Well, listen, I would anticipate that Florida State's going to have a really good goal line, short yardage defense with this, with the kids they've got.
Well, that's the thing, with this group, the way Fuller likes to play, he wants two safeties, right? Which means you're going to have light boxes. You're playing nickel defense essentially, and the ability to stop the run and generate a pass rush with your front is everything if you want to play that way in the back end. And so having as many options as we do, upgrading talent like we have, not having to, sacrifice coverage for personnel in the box to stop the run and that kind of thing, can really help the way he wants to play. And I think, we had moments last year where they played really well, but if you look back, those were against teams that, didn't really have really good quarterback play. When we play the good teams to be able to play that way, we got to produce with this group up front, stop the run, generate a pass rush. And I think that's what kind of got people excited in the near term, seeing the potential that this group may have to be able to do that.
Hey, Pat, let me ask a question of you two. I'm going into spring and I'm going to be looking for nuance. Are we doing anything a little different on the front? I'm leading you probably to a question.
I had a question for you and Mark in the same regard. With this particular defensive front, Mark, listen, I don't know. The offenses have changed in college football. Most of them are spread, RPO stuff. But do you do more bare front type stuff with this kind of personnel? With the Darrell Jackson and Fabien Lovett and Braden Fiske and Josh Farmer, do you do some odd base stuff in particular? And I'm thinking bare front. But do you do some of that? And I don't listen. It's obviously you're going to bare fronts mostly against run teams, right? You don't, but you can use it again.
Look, it totally depends on how you feel about the back end.
Right. Hold on. Please explain what you mean by a bare front.
Okay, bare fronts, you got three defensive linemen, and you got a guy over the nose, and either guys head up or shaded on the guards. So, did I explain it right, Mark?
Yeah, you're covering the middle three, and you're basically either playing man or man free on the back end when you play bare front. Okay, and you can have various. If you're playing zero, then you're probably bringing 5 or 6. If you're playing, cover zero, full, straight man on the back, you try to overload the front. You try to keep people from sliding. You're trying to create gaps in the middle for run throughs, and it's really conducive to doing a lot of twisting and stuff with those middle three guys and confusing pass protection schemes. The deal against it is that you are vulnerable in the back, and you got to be able to cover man to man. And if you don't get there, if they max protect and they block you, you're in trouble because somebody's getting free down the field. So that's kind of the thing. You're trying to overload them with numbers and defensive structure. So if you want to play that game, you got to feel good on the back end, and you better get there because if you don't, then you're in trouble, and that's the deal. So, but I haven't seen the propensity for Fuller to do that unless it was I want to say a desperate situation, but if he needed to shift momentum or to make a key stop, he would go to those kind of things, and pretty successful. How many times do we see Jamie Robinson or Shaheem Brown blitz from the secondary in that kind of structure and get there, right? And you're like, why doesn't he do that more? Well, everybody asks that question because he likes to outnumber you in the secondary and try to cover the running game and the with base numbers in the fronts. that's what he's shown in the past. So that's kind of the deal. Will he become braver? That's going to be interesting to see.
Well, listen, we still got one more transfer portal window to go through, May 1st through 15th or May 15th through 30th. I can't remember, these 15 days in May. It's been a long time since we've been able to talk about Florida State being deep at a lot of positions, and we think they're going to be really deep at both those interior tackle positions. Any concerns about people leave? I mean, how do you it's a whole new ball game for these coaching staffs. How do you manage and get all these kids reps and opportunity to prove themselves, Mark, and to snap count allocation and practice is probably just as important as in the spring as game snaps are in the fall.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about this group because your older guys are seniors, right? So these younger guys are really young and they're still developing. Hopefully they can see that. And you look at guys like Farmer, Lyons, Malcolm Ray, Lovett's going to be gone. Fiske is going to be gone. Briggs is going to be gone next year. Why transfer somewhere when you're going to be the guy next year and you're going to be part of the answer this year, the way we like to rotate? I think there's a lot to be said about sticking around with this group because our best guys are older guys that are, and our younger guys still have 2 and 3 years to play in this scheme. So I'm not as worried about it with this group. Maybe some others, but not this one.
Jerry, any concerns on your end that way?
No, for the same reasons.
All right, now, Jerry, obviously you've kind of talked about it earlier. We got to temper our expectations to some degree. Of course, I think that's with us three in general. I think we tried to kind of temper everybody's expectations about Jared Verse last year, and he exceeded those expectations by a ton. But just how good could this group? And let's and go to your point, Mark. Within the context of who FSU plays in the conference they play in, could this be one of the better interior tackle groups in the ACC in 2023?
Oh, unquestionably. I think we are, regardless. But the depth and the experience that we have coming back makes us that. I wouldn't trade this group, for anybody. I don't know. Clemson obviously probably has a lot of talent, 5-star talent, but in terms of depth and production coming back, obviously it's going to pay dividends. I think in our schedule, we should be able to be competitive with everybody on our schedule. We should be able to beat most.
Yep. Jerry, your thoughts?
No, I agree with that. Clemson probably has more 5 stars, but not with the experience this group has.
Yeah. So my final question to you guys on this tackle group is how it helps the others around them, and particularly talking about the defensive ends. You've got 2 really good guys in Patrick Payton and Jared Verse as your starters. They both have the ability to get to the quarterback. Offensive lines, Mark, may have to block this defense a little bit different. With who you have inside now with Lovett and Jackson and Fiske and Farmer, we're assuming those are going to, we're projecting those as the top 4 guys at those 2 spots. We think those will be the 4 guys that rotate the most. Could that free Verse up and free Payton up, and obviously the guys behind them, Bethune and Deloach?
Well, I think early it's going to be the opposite. I think everybody's going to be paying so much attention to Verse, Payton, and McClendon that it may free opportunities up for these guys. If they can take advantage of that and make people aware that they are a threat pass rushing, it may make people think twice about having to compensate for Verse. Because I don't think anybody scares you on this front pass rush wise. I mean, I look at these guys and I'm going, I don't see a Fletcher Cox or something like that in this group, or DeMarcus Christmas, or Derek Nottie, whatever. I don't see that here. But I see solid guys that are good college football players that are going to have some opportunities to produce in the passing game because of the talent we have on the outside.
Well, Jerry, I know that you're obviously one of the things you and I have talked about over the years is their last couple of years anyway, and it's probably better last year than it has been in the last 3 or 4 years. There's been a lack of a push in the interior to get to the quarterback. They haven't really had a guy that can pressure the passer with a healthy Lovett and a healthy Fiske, who Fiske had about 12 sacks, was an all-MAC player last year at Western Michigan. How much do you think that will help this defense, and do you anticipate them being better at getting some inside pressure, more inside pressure this year than he did last year?
Yeah, I would think so. A healthy, like you said, the two guys, if they're both healthy, and not to mention Jackson, and I like Farmer. I mean, Farmer's a guy that can get after the quarterback pretty good. So we should be better than we were last year. But to Mark's point, that one guy hasn't emerged yet.
Yeah. Well, listen, we think somebody will emerge, and as Mark said, it's a money year for several of these guys, including Fabien Lovett. Darrell Jackson could come out if he wanted to. He's going to be a true junior if he plays. Farmer's a third-year player, as a redshirt sophomore. So now we're not saying that Farmer's going to leave by any stretch of the imagination, but there's some motivation in that, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, I'm looking forward to seeing this interior defensive line crew in the spring. I think it's going to be a fun competition to watch. We know we got some proven commodities up front. And then, of course, Jerry, as we've talked about, even going back to the fall, we could not wait till the spring for this to get here so we could see guys like Tifase and Lyons and Bishop Thomas get more meaningful reps in practice and see them try to compete to get in this rotation. So, listen, we appreciate everyone joining us for our spring practice preview defensive tackles version. We also would appreciate it if you would go to floridastate.rivals.com or theosceola.com. We have written previews on each position group. You can find our defensive end preview, quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and defensive tackles. Those have already been done. Bob Ferrante, Kurt Weiler, and myself have written those. You can find those online. Obviously, we are continually reporting every day on the new updated offers that Florida State has extended. They've gone national this week. They've offered kids from California, Texas, Arizona, some top players in the nation. So please give us if you have not, or you're not a subscriber, please go to floridastate.rivals.com, floridastate.rivals.com, or theosceola.com. We have some free content. We have stuff behind the paywall, but would certainly appreciate you giving us an opportunity to check out our content. And we have a ton of stuff on baseball, softball, basketball, and women's basketball. So there is no shortage of Florida State news at theosceola.com. Mark and Jerry, I appreciate you guys joining me. Appreciate our listeners and viewers joining us for Seminole Sidelines. And we will be back with linebacker preview, wide receiver preview, tight ends, and
offensive line.
Mark, you and I get
Come
to
on,
offensive
man.
line. Listen, that's going to be a fascinating discussion because I think there's some guys that were starters last year that may not be starters in 2023. So we're going to have a fascinating discussion about that because this offensive line group may have a chance to be too deep at every position. But this is I think this is as exciting as we've all been collectively about a Florida State football team since we started this endeavor in 2019. But we want to thank you for joining us, and we'll be back later in the week with our wide receiver and linebacker video previews, and hope that you are looking forward to spring practice starting on March 6th as much as we are. But thank you for joining us, and we'll be back again soon.
Go Noles.